Sometime in the next year, the BBC governors, not the government or MPs, will decide whether or not the over-75s in this country will continue to get their television licences for nothing. Nearly 4.5 million homes don't pay the £150 fee, as anyone over 75 is exempt, even if they live with younger adults. Until now, the government covered the cost, the money going directly from the Social Security budget to the BBC. But from next year, BBC governors will decide whether the system continues. This is plainly ridiculous. How are the BBC governors qualified to take this decision? They're not elected politicians, but simply well-meaning members of a quango. Personally, I hope they scrap free TV licences for all over 75s and find a way of paying for only the poorest old people. In truth, the BBC governors should never have been put in this position in the first place. We elect politicians to sort these things out, and this is a cop-out by the government, who didn't want to be seen to take an unpopular decision.
Every week I go on my Twitter, right? Every week I go on my Twitter. This is a different point I'm going to make, and I'm not going to make the point that it's all right for you to say they should be scrapped because you can afford it. I'm not going to make that point
this time.
And nor am I going to make the fact that actually the point that you always want older, well not older, but anyone to pay more tax and stuff because you can afford it. I'm not even going to make that point either.
The point you've just made.
I am going to make. Yeah, the point I am. I'm getting there, my friend. I'm warming up. The point I'm going to make is every single week I go on my Twitter before the show and I say to people, what is it you would like me to debate on the pledge this week? Do you know the one topic that comes up week after week after week after week? It's the BBC licence fee. Week after week after week after week, people say to me, please will you debate the fact that the BBC licence needs to be scrapped?
Yeah.
Yes. They contact me every week of my life to ask me to debate that. So what I would say is, first of all, I do agree with you that it's a cop-out by the government for not having the balls, or whatever you want to call it, to make this decision themselves. So I agree with you on that. But I would say that if you're going to look at what we're going to do with this licence fee, you probably ought to raise it up a level and look at whether or not we still need that and whether or not that is still the way. Because when you look at, actually, I think the licence fee is going to cost them £725 million to subsidise this, which is a fifth of their budget.
The BBC?
Yes. Yeah, the BBC. And actually, the reason it's a fifth of their budget is because their budgets are getting stretched on things like very expensive dramas to compete with Amazon, Netflix and people like that. And one might be sitting at home shouting at the screen, going, hang on a minute, why should I be paying for the BBC to create very expensive drama series? And that's where I shall end my point.
The BBC should be ashamed that this is even a matter for debate. There is absolutely no justification to take TV away from one of the most vulnerable and ignored sections of society.
I agree.
TV is a lifeline to many old people from the outside world. It stops them from being lonely. It stops them from being isolated. And for them to even, the BBC prides itself on being a champion for civilised values, for a responsibility towards marginalised group, but they want to pickpocket pensioners. And it's a fallacy that all pensioners these days are well off, because they're not. The BBC's own stats say 1.9 million pensioners are living in poverty, and 1.5 million of them are living solely on the state pension alone. That's all they've got. And that's £7 grand a year, Greg. So if you take away 150 quid from them a year, that means something.
Sure. Which is why I said, let's look and find a way of paying for the poorest.
OK, so you mean how much does that cost? How much does means testing cost?
Well, we do means testing. We all do means testing.
How much does
it's
it
called
cost?
your tax system. There's all sorts of ways.
No, but I mean, how much of the 725 million would they get back?
Yes.
Well, on your figures, about half, I suspect.
About half. Can I just pick up on what Carol said? And, Carol, again, I don't know what's going on in the show today, but I keep agreeing with people I never agree with. Carol, I totally agree with everything you said. So this is a statement from Caroline Abrahams, who's the charity director at Age UK. And what she says is for 1 in 4 older people, the TV is their main form of companionship. The question for the BBC is therefore how they intend to fulfil the responsibility they have taken on as regards to the TV licence concession for the over 75s, who are amongst the most loyal and committed viewers and listeners, the majority of whom live on only modest incomes. And if you look at that, they're saying, what is this? Almost 4.5 million people who watch the BBC are over 75. That's such a huge chunk of their audience.
I have a choice here.
Not that many people are watching
I have
the
a choice here.
BBC.
Do I watch my old mate Greg Dyke get beaten up by 4 of us, or do I come and say, I'm just going to join in? Greg, you're talking...
It's good to see.
Yeah, well, what did you think? Did you ever doubt it? The House of Commons Library, let's take a look at this. As Michel said, this is the amount of money raised from the licence fee. Try £3.8 billion. Can I suggest £3.8 billion? Can I suggest? And in the days, and because let's remind everybody, you ran the place not that long ago.
No.
I don't know how
now.
Is
Not
it
that
now?
long.
Okay.
A decade.
But I don't know whether you're aware of the Netflixes and the Amazons and all that. Television, you know this better than I do, Greg, is delivered in such a different way now. As Michel says, the whole idea of a licence fee. I remember once when I was working in America, I described it to some Americans and they were amazed. So they said, so even if you never drive on the freeways, motorways, you only ever use the side roads, you still have to have a licence? And I said, yeah, even if you only ever watch Sky or you only watch ITV, you still... It's done, it's antiquated. Michelle's right, you can't switch it off like that because I appreciate there are funding issues and we all want parts of the Beeb to survive, but, mate, the whole licence fee's a done deal.
No, I think that's a different discussion. Whether long-term... I mean, every time it's ever looked at, the licence fee, they come up with, they say, look, it's not a satisfactory system, but it's better than any other. I'm not sure I agree. I think there are ways of funding the BBC that aren't via a licence fee. But that's not
to the new Greg?
That's not the specific... That's not the specific issue I'm talking about here. What I'm talking about is that sometime in the next year, you are asking a bunch of BBC governors to decide whether or not we should continue to subsidise the oldest and some of the poorest people in the country.
You know what they're going to do, don't you? They're going to not do it because they want to save the money. They haven't had to pay it till now.
No, I think what they will... Personally, I think what they will do is they'll find a way of trying to support the poorest pensioners.
So they'll means test it.
But when you're... Do you really think that when you're 75 or you're 75, you should get a fee licence?
Yes, I've been paying long enough.
Yes, absolutely. And a bus pass.
Absolutely.
I want a bus pass and a TV licence.
You've been paying for 50 years, you better believe it.
Tony Hall said recently that older people consume more services. And you know why they do? Because they've been paying into the system longer.
Right, can we listen? Can we just listen to...
You should be thanking them.
Yes. Let's listen to the new Greg. This is the new Greg, the Director General of the BBC, Lord Hall. Let's listen to what he says.
We've got, on the one hand, inflation in the content market. On the one hand, our audience is expecting us to do different things, and you know, their expectations have gone up. On the other hand, real hardship among pensioners. This is a very, very difficult issue, and I suspect, you know, it's one of the reasons why we have to think about it, and the government said over to you, is because it's a very, very hard thing to work through, and I know the board will take that very, very seriously.
Tony is a terribly polite man who never... I mean, what he should have said then was, and the government should never have given this to us. Now, when they tried to do it before, his predecessor said, and the chairman, both said, if you do this, we'll resign. And the government backed off. They accepted it, and I think it was a mistake. Because
should he have threatened to resign?
Who? He should have threatened to resign like Mark Thompson did before him, because actually they've left the governors in a ridiculous position. And what do the governors do? They're there to make sure there's a good BBC. And this decision is a decision for politicians. And if it's unpopular because they've got to do it, that's the politicians' fault. But they've got to take that decision.
Do you accept if they did take this away from pensioners, that it would make a mockery of their role as a public service organisation?
No.
You don't accept that?
I think you could well subsidise the poorest pensioners. I think all the evidence that you can find shows that actually the number of poor pensioners today compared with 20 years ago...
2 million people living in poverty.
Sure.
2 million.
So subsidise those 2 million. But
don't subsidise
4.5 million.
I don't know about you, Greg, but I'm looking forward to my freebies. Yeah. I'm looking forward to my free licence, my bus.
By the time you get there, there won't be any.
Because you paid for it.
You haven't paid for it. You pay for what you consume in the year as the BBC.
I'm just going to summarise this debate. He wants us just to pay more tax and get less things for free. There you go. Just in case you missed that, that's what he said.